Hello guys, my name is Diego Pacheco and this will be a slidecast about SRE. So let's get started. So my name is Diego Pacheco, I'm software architect, I'm Brazilian. I wrote the book Building Applications with Scala. I record a series of video building effective microservices with Java and Netflix OSS. On the left you can see my GitHub handler, my tweet handler, and my blog. This video also gonna be available on YouTube. So first of all, I want to share some references, some good SRE books. Mostly are books from Google folks. So we have the classical site reliability engineering. There is the site reliability workbook, Seeking SRE. Lots of folks does not know this one, database reliability engineering, and there's the new one, building and secure reliable systems. So basically, what's SRE? So SRE stands for Site Reliability Engineer, and Ben Traynor SLOS coined the term in 2000. So he basically said that SRE is what happens when you ask a software engineer to design an operations function. All right. So historically, there's some overlap here, right? Because we always had sys admins for operational systems, network admins for the network, and ops teams, classical ops teams, and then we got like cloud ops teams and stuff like that. But basically, historically, what happened, right? And there's lots of relations with that, with the DevOps movement, is the fact that all these sysops, cloud ops, classical ops often were doing things manually and have zero or no knowledge about what had inside of a service, right? They always treat services as black boxes. And SRE proposal is more like you get an engineer, right? So we will understand exactly what's going on inside of the box. We'll have automation, we'll have proper observability, and then we're gonna have a better reliability. So in DevOps, there's this classical wall of confusion where often you have a Jira ticket and then you have a developer engineer throwing a ticket in production to another team to operate. So easily you can see if you're doing proper DevOps, probably you are doing SRE. So SRE is more like a function and DevOps is more like a movement. So SRE has a culture, and these are pretty much like Google terms. So you want to have like share ownership, you want to reduce organizational silos, and that's very well aligned with DevOps movement. You want to work with SLO, service level objectives. You want to have blameless postmortems. So basically, you want to accept failure as normal. We don't want to do witch hunts. It's not about fire anyone, but about learning and making the system more reliable. You want to reduce the cost of failure, so you want to implement gradual change. Often failure happens because there is a new deploy and something change or configuration or code. You also want to automate your job away. So it's really about leveraging tooling and automation, because if you are doing SRE manually, you are really into the classical ops or sysadmin mode, and then it doesn't make sense, right? So in order to have SRE, you need to have this engineering mentality and engineering experience, but also automation and observability. And you want to measure not only reliability but also toil, which is work that's not overhead, but work that it needs to be automated, and when you can, you need to automate. So there are some important concepts you need to know, like MTTD, MTTR, error budgets, SLA, and SLOs. So MTTD and MTTR are mean time to detect and mean time to recover. So if you're talking about DevOps, you're definitely talking about these metrics. Often when we have a DevOps adoption, we want to reduce these numbers. So we want to reduce the time to detect and the time to recover. And SLA and SLOs, in SRE we often use SLOs because there's no agreement. It's more like an objective. So you get a product champion or engineering team who is responsible for a product or a service component, and then you're gonna have availability goals, right? And then you can measure by month, by day, by hour, how much downtime you can have, all right, or you can accept. Then you get the idea of error budget, and if you have space in your error budget, you do deploys. If you don't, you basically wait to do deploys so you don't affect the overall availability of your product. Another important concepts are Jitter, Retries, and Exponential backoff. So in distributed systems, there is this concept of the thundering herd, right? So imagine you have 1,000 servers to connect to a config server, for instance. So if they all boot up at the same time, they are resetted at the same time or something like that, you're gonna have 100 instances doing requests to that server, and that might be very hard to the server. So what you want to do, and you want to do that always, is have Jitter, right? So Jitter pretty much is a randomic time you're gonna put in all the servers so they hit a central server in different times, right? You want to be very cautious about retries because as distributed systems, how they work, especially in the cloud, failure will happen all the time. But then you need to have retries. But if you have retries, you can make the situation worse and you can create alters. So if you use retries, you need to use retries with exponential backoff. Any good client has configs for retries, jitter, and exponential backoff. So if you take a look on most of AWS SDKs, is there, you can configure it, and you should. And if it's not there, you definitely need to build because you want to avoid this thundering herd problem. Another thing is, what's the relationship between DevOps and SRE? So I would say DevOps is a movement. DevOps is like agile for operations, and SRE is more like a function. It's more like a role. Although you definitely saw this in the market, there is roles like DevOps architect or DevOps engineer or even DevOps department, right? So that's wrong because everybody should be doing departments. It's like saying I have an agile department, and believe me, these things exist. So everybody should be doing DevOps like everybody should be doing agile. So this should not be a department, but SRE can be a department and can be a role. So basically, SRE is a role, but this role, it needs to happen with automation and with observability, and with someone who is an engineer who can work with the engineering teams and can understand what is inside of the boxes of the services and tune things and take proactive measures to make sure that service is reliable. And we're gonna talk about these measures. We already covered some of them. We're gonna cover more on the course of this slidecast. But if you do DevOps properly, you're definitely gonna be doing SRE, right? So one thing that companies do, they have like this dual model where you can have like a generic SRE that knows a bit of everything, or you can have like specialists, like you could have a JVM specialist, or you could have, let's say, a MySQL specialist or a Redis specialist, and so on and so on. So one thing that is really important and it came from Silicon Valley is this culture of you build it, you run it. So Amazon works with this culture, Netflix, and several other companies on the valley. This means we are trying to avoid silos, and overall we are improving the customer experience. So basically you're gonna have engineering teams doing their deploys and operating these things, and SREs are basically we could call SREs like a reliability architect as well, that goes there and help these teams to have better reliability in their services and their products, but it's not responsible for everything. For sure, these people will be first, in the front lines when there's a fire and issues with the engineering teams that are on the rotation or something like that. But they cannot be a centralized group that does everything, because then again you're gonna have bottleneck that will be the same as your classical SysOp or classical ops or cloud ops team, all right? And then you're just changing words and not changing the model. And the model, what matters is about having automation, having teams responsible for the things they put in production, and right, working with observability. That's why SRE is all about. So I mentioned sometimes already like observability, right? So observability was a term coined by Twitter kind of like 2011 pretty much, where there are three main things. There are metrics, there are traces, and there are logs. So in your systems, your microservices or your components like databases, like caches, like queues, like object storage, you want to have metrics. So you want to expose the systems to have better understanding, and you want to have dashboards. We also want to work with distributed traces, so we can know HTTP error codes, we can know times, we can figure out where bottlenecks are happening. And also we want to work with centralized logs, because you have so many machines, you have cattle, you don't have pets, and then it's really impossible to see machine by machine. And often people are working with cloud or Docker, so you have or Kubernetes, you have this ephemeral nature where you might lose that instance. Then the log really needs to be someplace else. So that's why you need a centralized log. For SRE, it's really important to work with actionable alerts, right? So it's easy to alerts became noise, and there's no value in noise. There's only confusion. So there is this matrix on the right. So basically you want to avoid FOII or complete crap alerts, right? Alerts that you don't know what to do, or there's nothing for you to investigate or to do, rather than ignore the alert or keep increasing the threshold. And when I say keep increasing the threshold, you could imagine someone create alert for a CPU load for a database, and then what you do, you go there and you increase the threshold, right? Because it doesn't mean anything. So really you need to be actionable, right? And I would say what you want to do, you want to start with actionable alerts, which means there's something you can investigate, all right, or that you have a handbook of something you can do to fix it. But then you want to automate it, right? You want to move from the green to the red block on the matrix, and you want to make your system more reliable in the way that he is self-remediating, that he can detect the issue, he can fix by himself. That's where you want to go. Another important tool for SRE is to work with a production-ready checklists. So here is a list of suggestions, but you definitely need to build this in your company or per your products or services. So let's say nothing goes in production without unit or proper integration tests, or proper chaos testing, or automated stress tests, automated DB scripts with Liquibase or Fireway, metrics, so your system expose metrics, centralized logs, deploy automation in Jenkins, let's say, security high fives. If you're using Docker, Kubernetes, like if your YAMLs are correct and working fine, build hygiene and architecture review. So talking about automation, there are multiple tools. These are the tools that I most work with, like Terraform, Ansible, Jenkins, and Liquibase. It could be different ones, but what matters is you're not doing things by click. You need to have automation. And again, this is not the goal of SRE to do all the automation, right? The teams need to be automating. So SRE will be maybe blocking the deploys because some team doesn't have automation, right? But it shouldn't be the source, centralized source, right? And again, if SRE is a centralized source of automation, you're probably gonna have a bottleneck and the model will not work. Another important thing that people really don't do it is incident drill downs, right? So you simulate a fire, because believe me, you're gonna have a fire, and that happens in real life, right? If you take a look, several companies, they do fire drill downs, right? So they simulate a fire, so they evacuate the building, people need to left, and they record how long it took and how it went, right? So to improve. So you can do the same. So you can simulate an outage, you can see how long people take to detect and how they fix it, and that could be really important and could help to avoid outages in production. So incident drill downs are really important practice for SRE to do with engineering teams in regular basis. Another important thing that SRE needs to enforce is make sure the engineering teams are working with throttling, caps and limits, and no unbounded. All right. So basically, you don't want to have unbounded queue. You don't want to have unbounded API. So you want to put throttling or rate limit in place. You want to have limits. All services in AWS, they have limits, right? They have soft and they have hard limits, and you need to watch this in your services as well. One another important aspect is about cold starts and cold caches, right? So at scale, if you have a cache, it means it's part of your reliability path. You cannot just consider the database, because let's say if the cache is down or some nodes of the cache is down, the database might receive such of hard and heavy load, and maybe you cannot handle that, right? So there's techniques like load shedding, where you could drop some of this load, but there are cases where you cannot really deny that load that you need to accept. So making sure that your caches are always hot is important. Have this code bootstrap process that go there and sync with nearby peer to make sure that the cache is always boot up with data rather than empty. That's an important thing you want to check out with your teams, especially at scale. And finally, right, SRE is about education. So it's easy to just use new terms, all right? So in the past, we was using SysOps, then Ops, then Agile Ops or Cloud Ops, and now we call SRE. But we still don't have automation, we still don't have observability, we still don't work with the teams, we are not doing incident drill downs, we are not doing worried about these concerns that I mentioned through the video, like Jitter, like exponential backoff. We are not looking our MTTR and MTTD. So really, you need to educate your teams to go in this mindset. So it's important to have trainings. It's important to work in a different way. That's really key to adopt SRE. Some companies like Google, they only hire SREs that are engineers, and they teach them the ops part. So that's another important thing. So this needs to be understood from inside. It cannot be treated as black boxes. Otherwise, again, we would be in the previous model, just doing the same things with different names, and that doesn't make sense. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you like it. See you next time. Bye.